All right, strap yourselves in for this deep dive because we're tackling the one and only Alan Watts.
Oh, a great
Oh
choice.
yeah, we're going deep into 4 of his lectures.
Okay.
The Web of Life, parts 1 and 2, and The Inevitable Ecstasy, also
Right.
parts 1 and 2.
Lots to unpack there.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to explore his fascinating ideas about life and perception and what it even means to be human. Are you ready for this?
I was born ready.
Okay, so to kick things off,
Hmm.
let's start with that web of life analogy Watts uses. It's all about interconnectedness, but with a few twists and turns along the way.
Right. It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Right, exactly.
Watts was really good at making you question everything you thought you knew. He didn't give you one neat little philosophy, but instead he gives you all these different lenses to look through.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so interesting and thought-provoking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this web of life analogy, it's about how everything's connected, but it's not always pretty, right?
Right. He plays with this idea of what he calls isolates. Things we see as separate just because we're focusing on certain parts and not the whole picture.
Isolates, interesting.
Yeah, think of it like looking at a tapestry.
Okay.
Up close, all you see are the individual threads,
Mm-hmm.
but you miss the overall design, the big picture.
So we're missing the forest for the trees, basically.
Exactly. And this leads to Watt's idea of mutuality.
Okay.
The idea that forces that seem opposite, they actually depend on each other to exist.
Opposites attract kind of thing?
Sort of.
Right.
It's like the warp and woof of a fabric. They create the very structure of reality itself.
Okay, so far so good. Everything's connected. We need opposites. Got it.
But
There's always a but
there is.
with Alan Watts.
Watts flips the script a bit and says this web can also be a trap.
Oh, okay.
And he gets into this idea of mutual exploitation, which is kind of a dark take on things.
Mutual exploitation.
Yeah, he gives these hilarious but kind of shocking examples to make his point.
I like those. Give me an example.
Well, like how we all try to ignore the fact that we're literally eating other beings to survive.
Right.
Or that ancient vagina dentata fantasy, the fear of men being swallowed whole by women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's about this primal fear of being trapped.
Okay, so now we're getting a little bit darker, a little bit more intense.
A little bit.
Are you saying we should all just become pessimists and embrace this grim view of life?
No, not at all.
What's the point of going down this, darker path?
That's what's so cool about Watts. He's not saying we should wallow in negativity.
Mhm.
He's saying, look, by facing our selfishness, really confronting it head on,
Yeah.
we might start to see that there's no real separation between us and everything else.
So by understanding our own selfish impulses, we realize we're actually part of something bigger.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
It's like we spend so much energy trying to protect this idea of ourselves, our ego.
Right.
But the more we examine it, the more we realize it's not as solid as we thought it was.
It's kind of like trying to hold on to smoke. The harder you grasp it, the faster it slips away.
Perfect analogy.
But then the question becomes, how do we let go of this illusion, this idea of a separate self?
Well,
Is there even a way?
Watts talks about integrating what he calls the shadow.
Oh, like our dark side.
Exactly. Those parts of ourselves we tend to hide or deny.
It's the stuff we try to sweep under the rug?
Yeah, and he even compares holiness to troublemaking.
What, like saints and rebels?
In a way, he argues that both challenge the status quo, they push us outside of our comfort zones.
So the parts of ourselves we're often ashamed of,
Mm-hmm.
those might actually hold the key to understanding who we really are.
That's a great way to put it.
That's pretty deep.
And humor plays a big role in all of this, too.
Oh, for sure.
Watts loved to laugh, and he believed that being able to laugh at ourselves, especially at our self-importance, is a sign of real awareness.
Like not taking ourselves too seriously,
Thanks.
recognizing that we're all just playing roles in this grand cosmic play.
Right. Which brings us to Watts' concept of Maya, the illusion of the world. He describes it like peeling an onion, you keep taking off layers.
Okay.
But there's no solid core, no real self at the center.
So it's all just a facade. We're fooling ourselves and each other.
Well, in a way, yeah. Watts is saying that life itself is a performance, a series of masks and roles we put on.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It can be.
If it's all an illusion, where's the joy in that?
Well, Watts believed that by seeing through the illusion, by recognizing the absurdity of it all, we actually become more free to enjoy the game.
Okay.
We can appreciate the beauty and wonder without getting lost in the drama.
I'm starting to get it. But how do we get back to that childlike sense of wonder that Watts talks about in The Inevitable Ecstasy? That pure awareness before we got all caught up in the illusion.
He calls it attachment or hang up. This tendency we have to get fixated on distinctions and labels and forget the fundamental ground of being. Yeah, like we cling to ideas of good and bad, self and other, and we miss the flow of experience itself.
So we create these rigid categories, and then we get tracked by them.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Watts argues that this clinging is what creates the ego.
Ego, right?
This false sense of self that keeps us from experiencing reality directly.
Okay, I see the connection.
He even suggests a simple contemplation exercise. Just observe your thoughts and sensations without judging them, like watching clouds drift by.
That sounds kind of peaceful.
It can be.
So by simply observing our thoughts and feelings, we can start to loosen the grip of the ego.
It's a start.
Interesting.
This then can lead to a pretty big shift in how we see things. Watts has this really cool analogy. He says it's like the universe is looking at itself through an aperture, which is us.
Whoa, that's deep.
But it's always seeking, always looking, but never fully grasping itself.
Like trying to catch your own reflection.
Kind of.
So we're trying to grasp something outside of ourselves when in reality we are that something.
You got it.
Mind blown.
And this leads to another crucial point. Once we start to let go of that ego illusion, we see how arbitrary our judgments actually are. Good, bad, pleasant, painful.
Wait, are you saying there's no difference between those things?
No, not exactly. What Watts is saying is our evaluations, they're based on comparisons, on our own interpretations, not on inherent qualities.
So it's not that these experiences don't exist, but our ideas about them are what create our reality.
Right, like with colors.
Oh.
We need contrast to even see red as red.
So it's all relative.
It's all about perception, context. Watts challenges us to remember those times when we were kids, fascinated by, simple sensations, sounds, patterns, textures, things that captivated us before we learned to judge everything.
Oh, I get that. I used to spend hours just watching ants crawl around.
Exactly. There's a certain magic in those experiences when we can see them with fresh eyes without trying to control or define them.
It's like rediscovering the beauty of a sound or a color or a texture. The world suddenly becomes alive with wonder again.
And that brings us to a big one, embracing the void.
The void? That sounds a little scary.
A lot of people fear it, yeah. They connect it with death, oblivion. But Watts says that fear is based on a misunderstanding.
So instead of fearing nothingness, we should embrace it. How does that even work?
Well, he points out that it's a mistake to think nothingness is powerless.
Okay.
In reality, it's the source of everything, the ground from which everything arises and to which it returns.
So it's not an empty void, but more like a wellspring of potential.
Exactly.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that one.
Watts even points to examples in poetry and philosophy where people find beauty and depth in things like impermanence and dissolution.
Okay.
Think about the crumbling ruins of some ancient city or the fading echo of laughter. They point to this ultimate reality of nothingness, but it's not a bad thing.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's about seeing beauty in the impermanence of things.
Yeah, and recognizing that even though things change and fade away, there's still a deeper reality underneath it all.
Wow, this is heavy stuff.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating once you start to get it.
So how do we even begin to grasp this concept of the void? It seems so abstract and, well, void-like.
Well, Watts would say, start by simply contemplating it. Ask yourself, what remains when everything is stripped away? What is the ground of being, the source of all that is?
Okay, that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to need some time to ponder that one. But this is just the beginning of our Alan Watts journey, right?
Oh, yeah, just scratching the surface.
There's so much more to uncover, so much more to explore.
We've got 3 parts to this deep dive, remember?
That's right. So buckle up, everyone, because we're just getting started. We're about to dive even deeper into the mind-bending world of Alan Watts and uncover how these profound ideas can actually help us navigate the complexities of everyday life.
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
It is, but I have a feeling Watts has some surprising and insightful answers for us. So stay tuned, because we're about to get really practical in part 2.
I can't wait.
So we've been talking about some pretty heady stuff.
It is, yeah.
Embracing the void, letting go of our egos.
Right.
Seeing through this illusion of a separate self. It's a lot to process.
It is a lot to digest, yeah.
But how do we actually live with this new understanding?
Right.
I mean, we still have jobs and relationships and, real-world stuff to deal with.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not about, running away from the world or becoming some kind of hermit living in a cave.
Right.
You're not going to go full-on mountaintop guru.
Yeah, I can just imagine myself, trying to explain all this to my family at dinner. It's not going to go over well.
Watts wouldn't want you to force it on anyone,
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
whole point is that we can bring this awareness into our everyday lives.
Okay.
So not reject the world, but change how we relate to it.
All right, give me an example.
Okay.
How does embracing the void help me, let's say, deal with a super stressful work deadline?
Remember that analogy of the leaf floating on a stream?
I do, yeah.
It's about trusting the flow, knowing that you don't have to control every single thing.
So instead of stressing out, I should just kind of go with the flow. That seems a little, I don't know, too laid back, even for me.
Well, it's not about being totally passive.
Okay.
It's more about shifting your perspective, Like, think of a really good poker player.
Okay.
They know it's a game, so they can take risks and bluff and even lose without getting all bent out of shape.
Okay.
Because they're not so attached to the outcome.
I can see that, so I can still put in the effort, work hard, but without all the anxiety and fear of failing.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
You can play the game of life, but with more awareness and more detachment.
So appreciate the highs and lows without getting swept away by it.
Exactly.
That makes sense, but what about those times when life just throws you a total curveball?
Right.
Like serious illness, grief, heartbreak, that kind of stuff.
They're heavy stuff.
That feels a lot bigger than a poker game,
For sure.
How does embracing the void work then?
Well, Watts was really honest about that. He didn't sugarcoat the tough parts of life. He knew pain and suffering were part of the deal,
Yeah.
but he encouraged people to look at their reactions to those experiences.
Okay.
He'd say a lot of our suffering comes from resisting what is.
So it's not the pain itself that's the problem, but our trying to deny it or run away from it.
Exactly.
Okay.
He used this example of a kid throwing up.
Okay.
The actual throwing up might be a relief,
Right?
but we have all this social baggage around it.
Yeah.
The kid feels shamed or scared.
Oh no, I made a mess.
Yeah.
People are going to think I'm gross.
Exactly. But really, the body's just doing what it needs to do.
It's like we've learned to fear these natural processes,
Right.
even the ones that are meant to heal us.
And that resistance, that's what causes more suffering. It's the same with our emotions, even death.
Death, right?
Yeah, we have this huge taboo around death.
We do.
Like, it's this terrible failure.
Mm.
We push it away, pretend it doesn't exist.
Instead of seeing it as, like you were saying, this natural transition, a part of life.
Right. Watts felt like we missed out on something important by making death this scary clinical thing.
Okay.
He thought we should be more open to it. See it as this powerful shift, maybe even a spiritual one.
It's interesting. He talks about people who have had near-death experiences.
Yeah.
Describing this amazing feeling of being connected to everything. Like seeing how perfect the universe is because they were willing to let go.
Right.
Maybe those moments, those glimpses of a bigger reality, they're available to us even before we die.
It's possible.
But we got to be willing to surrender to the unknown.
Yeah, to face that void without freaking out.
It's kind of like that feeling on a roller coaster right before the big drop.
Oh, yeah.
Terrifying, but also exciting because you're totally surrendering.
You're completely helpless, but also super alive in that moment.
And maybe in that surrender, that willingness to just let go, we find a freedom and joy we never thought possible.
It could be.
Okay, I'm with you so far, but how do we actually do this?
Right.
How do we overcome that fear of nothingness, that resistance to letting go?
Well, Watts was a big believer in meditation.
Meditation.
Not to achieve some special state,
Right.
but just to be present with whatever's happening inside you
Right.
without judging or trying to change it.
So not emptying the mind, but more like observing it, letting thoughts and feelings come and go, like clouds passing by.
That's the idea.
And as we get better at this non-attachment thing, we start to see that good and bad, pleasant and painful, they're just labels, not some inherent truth.
It's like you're taking off a pair of tinted glasses and finally seeing the world in its true colors.
Without all our preconceived ideas and judgments clouding things up.
And in that clarity, even ordinary things can become fascinating again.
Yeah, like seeing the world through the eyes of a kid again.
Exactly.
Everything new and exciting. I remember when I was little, I used to be totally mesmerized by how sunlight hit a spider web. All those tiny droplets sparkling
It's beautiful, isn't it?
like diamonds. It was magical.
Watts would say that kind of magic is all around us if we're open to seeing it.
Okay.
That childlike sense of wonder.
Yeah.
That's the key to what he called the inevitable ecstasy.
It's like realizing that life itself is a gift.
Yeah.
This incredible, miraculous thing that we get to be a part of.
And we often forget that, caught up in our heads.
We do. Okay, but I still get stuck on that whole death thing.
Death.
Yeah, I can kind of wrap my head around this nothingness idea,
Yeah.
but it's hard to imagine my own non-existence, you know?
That's natural. A lot of people feel that way.
They do.
But Watts was trying to tell us nothingness isn't an empty void.
Right.
It's the source of everything, where everything comes from and goes back to.
So it's not something to be afraid of, but something to, like, embrace.
Yeah.
The ultimate source of peace and freedom. This is some serious mind-bending stuff.
He uses these beautiful metaphors to describe it, like he compares nothingness to the emptiness of space,
Okay.
which holds all the stars and planets.
Right. Or the silence after a symphony, which still has all the music that came before in it.
Wow, so it's like saying that nothingness isn't an absence of something, but a fullness, a potential.
Yeah, like a creative force that's always there, even if we can't see it.
And by tapping into that infinite potential, by realizing that our true nature is this, emptiness, we're no longer limited by our egos and fears and attachments.
Right.
Watts even says we become invincible.
He did.
I can see that.
If we're not clinging to anything, if we're not afraid of losing anything,
Mm-hmm.
there's a kind of freedom in that.
But it's still a massive jump to go from, like, fearing death to embracing nothingness as a source of power,
It is a big shift, for sure.
And it probably doesn't happen overnight for most of us. It's a journey.
Oh.
Just be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Celebrate the small victories along the way.
So it's okay to have doubts, to feel scared, to not get it right away.
Of course, that's all part of being human.
Right.
By accepting those feelings, just letting yourself be where you are.
You create space for change to happen.
It's like learning to dance with your shadows.
Yeah.
Embrace the darkness as well as the light.
Beautifully put. And it's in that dance, that embrace, that we might actually discover what life is all about.
All right, so we've been going on and on about this idea
Yeah.
that we can act in the world, but without, being attached to what happens, the outcome.
Right.
I have to admit, it still feels a little like a Zen koan to me.
A what?
Like one of those riddles that are designed to kind of break your brain a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I get you. It does seem kind of paradoxical, right? Like,
yeah.
Watts
Yeah.
wouldn't want us just sitting around, waiting for enlightenment or whatever.
Yeah.
He was all about engaging with life, but
You're like,
not in the way we're usually taught.
so how do we bridge that gap? How do we reconcile this idea of letting go with actually, making stuff happen in the world?
Okay, think about it this way.
Okay.
You're like a master archer.
Okay. I like this. Okay.
They put all their skill and focus into that one shot.
Right.
But once the arrow leaves the bow, that's it.
Right.
They've let go.
Okay.
They can't control where it lands anymore.
Okay, I'm seeing the analogy here. So we put in the effort, we do our best, but then what? We just surrender to whatever happens. Doesn't that seem a bit risky?
It's not about being reckless. It's about recognizing that we're not in control of everything.
Okay.
Watts would say that trying to force things to go a certain way can actually backfire.
Right.
It's like trying to hold on to
The
water.
tighter you grip it,
Yeah.
the more it slips through your fingers.
Exactly.
So how do we even know what to do then? If we're not supposed to be attached to specific goals, how do we even choose a direction? Make plans? Just like live our lives.
Well, Watts thought that action comes naturally
Okay.
when we're aware, when we're in tune with our true selves.
Okay.
So it's not about forcing yourself to do what you think you should do,
Right.
but more about paying attention to what feels right, what's genuine for you. So it's less about making it happen and more about, I don't know, listening to some kind of inner wisdom or something.
Yeah, you could say that. He talks about finding the path of least resistance,
Right.
not in a lazy way,
Right.
but as in aligning yourself with how life is already flowing.
Okay, that makes sense in theory,
Mm-hmm.
but can you give me a real-world example? How does this actually play out in, real life?
Sure. Imagine someone who's really passionate about, let's say, protecting the environment.
Okay.
They don't just sit around and complain, they take action
Right.
because it feels right to them.
Okay.
It aligns with their values, with who they are deep down.
So it's not like they're forcing themselves to be an activist, but they're responding to something that feels true to them.
Yeah, like a calling, something meaningful.
Mm.
And because their actions come from that place,
Yeah.
they're not so easily discouraged by obstacles or setbacks.
Right. They're more resilient.
Exactly. They're not attached to a particular outcome,
Okay.
but they're committed to the journey.
That's powerful. So it's not about passivity, but about aligning our actions with what really matters to us and then letting go of the need to control what happens.
You got it. And that's where the real freedom is. When you're not clinging to a specific outcome,
Yeah.
you're open to possibilities you couldn't have planned for.
Right.
You can respond to challenges in a creative way, learn and grow from every experience,
Yeah.
no matter what happens.
That's like by surrendering to how life unfolds, by trusting that there's something bigger at play, we actually become more effective, not less.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
It's about becoming a co-creator with the universe, instead of trying to be in charge of everything.
This whole conversation has been so mind-blowing, honestly. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to approach life, how to find joy and purpose, even when things are chaotic.
That's great to hear.
And that's what I love about Watts, He wanted to help people live more fully, more consciously.
Yeah, with more joy.
He really believed that by understanding how things really are, by accepting the paradoxical nature of it all, we could find this amazing freedom and peace that most people only dream of.
It's a beautiful vision, isn't it?
It is, and I have to say, he's made me a believer. But I also know we've just scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's so much more to discover in his work.
A lifetime of exploration, really.
So for everyone listening, if you're feeling even a little bit inspired by what we've been talking about, I really encourage you to dive into Alan Watts' stuff.
He's got something for everyone.
It's a journey worth taking.
It is.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
The real magic happens when you start applying these ideas to your own life, seeing how they resonate with your own experience.
It becomes a personal journey.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Alan Watts. I hope it's inspired you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the mystery and wonder of existence.
Until next time.
Yeah, keep diving deep, everyone.
Yeah.